In the quiet, dusty dawn of Texas, 20-year-old Airman Jackson Reed laced up his boots with the same calm focus he did every morning. The road ahead stretched 10 long miles toward Lackland Air Force Base, and Jackson was ready to walk every inch. Not because he had to be early, he was never late, but because he didn't own a car. This was his commute, day in and day out. Long before the base bugle rang out, Jackson was already on the move. His routine was as disciplined as it was lonely. Occasionally, other airmen passed him by in their vehicles. A few would offer him a lift, but Jackson always declined with a firm, respectful nod. He wasn't walking for sympathy. Raised by his grandfather, a stoic Vietnam veteran who believed character was built one tough mile at a time, Jackson had embraced those miles like a ritual. That morning, as he passed the corner convenience store, the elderly clerk gave him a knowing nod. 10 miles again, son. Jackson adjusted his backpack with a modest shrug. Yes sir, he said, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Inside, a small television flickered with a live broadcast. President Donald Trump was visiting Lackland to speak to new recruits. Jackson gave the screen a passing glance before resuming his march. What he didn't know was that something about this day, this very walk, was about to shift his story. While Jackson kept his steady pace along the roadside, unaware of anything different, a hive of energy buzzed miles away. At Lackland, security teams, camera crews, and commanders were in full motion, preparing for the president's arrival. Somewhere between the outer edge of San Antonio and the base perimeter, a long line of black SUVs rolled down the highway, gliding past gas stations and oak-lined fences. Inside one of them sat President Trump, beside his military advisor, General McAdams. As the motorcade moved forward, Trump's gaze landed on a solitary figure walking along the shoulder, head down, backpack strapped tight, stride purposeful. That one military? He asked, nodding toward the silhouette. The general looked. Could be, sir. They wear civilian clothes off duty sometimes. Trump kept his eyes on the young man. There was something about that image, the resolve, the solitude, the pace, that tugged at something deep within him. Maybe it reminded him of the stories his father used to share about grit and perseverance. He looks like he's on a mission, Trump said quietly. The general asked if they should stop, but Trump shook his head. Let's not distract him, he said. But find out who he is. Jackson kept walking, completely unaware that the President of the United States had just taken an interest in him. Recognition wasn't on Jackson's mind. He had work to do, pride to carry, and miles to finish. But far behind the scenes, quiet inquiries had begun. By the time the motorcade arrived at the base, staff members had already started tracking the mysterious figure. Security footage along the highway confirmed his identity. Jackson Reed, Airman First Class, 20 years old, walked 10 miles to the base every day. An aide briefed the president, no vehicle, never late, turned down shuttle rides, didn't want to be treated differently. Trump reviewed the file slowly. Jackson's background read like a quiet blueprint for perseverance. Orphaned young. Raised by his grandfather in a remote corner of Arkansas. Top of his class. Enlisted right after graduation. Get me his CO, Trump said. Back on the base, Jackson was standing in formation, unaware of the quiet buzz surrounding his name. Colonel Hayes, his commanding officer, approached the president with a quiet pride. Airman Reed is one of our best, he said. Shows up early, never complains. We didn't even realize how far he was walking until recently. Trump nodded. I'd like to meet him, he said. The colonel offered to inform Jackson, but Trump declined. Let's keep it quiet, he said. I want to see how he carries himself when no one's watching. Because sometimes, it's not about how you serve when you're applauded, it's how you walk when the world isn't looking. The next morning, Jackson went through his usual motions, boots tight, bag packed, eyes forward. The president's visit was the talk of the base, but Jackson didn't pay it much attention. His focus stayed locked on the road ahead. Around his neck, Hidden beneath his shirt, hung his grandfather's old dog tags, a daily reminder of the values passed down to him. Work hard in silence, his grandfather always told him. Let your actions speak. As Jackson passed the same convenience store, the old clerk smiled wide. President drove by yesterday, he said knowingly. Jackson offered a faint smile. I heard. The clerk added, reckon he saw you. Jackson gave a half shake of his head and moved on. The road was his again. Same miles, same mindset. He arrived at the gate a bit earlier than usual that day. A base vehicle pulled up beside him. You Airman Reed? The driver asked. Yes, sir. Hop in. You're needed at Hangar 4. Jackson looked puzzled. Am I in trouble? The driver chuckled. I just drive where I'm told. Jackson climbed in, unaware that Hangar 4 had been transformed for something entirely unexpected. Inside that hangar, his world was about to tilt. The building was strangely silent. Jackson's boots echoed as he stepped inside. A tall man in uniform approached. Airman Reed, please wait here. Moments later, the massive hangar doors creaked open. Secret Service agents filed in, followed by President Donald Trump. Jackson's posture stiffened instinctively, attention, respect, discipline. At ease, son, Trump said, his voice steady but kind. Jackson relaxed slightly, still confused. I saw you yesterday, Trump continued, walking down the highway. Jackson blinked. Yes, sir. I walked to base. 10 miles. Yes, sir. Trump paused. Why? Jackson hesitated, then answered with quiet honesty. I don't like handouts. My grandfather always said, if you've got 2 legs, you can carry yourself. Trump took a long breath. You don't do it for recognition. No, sir. I do it because I made a promise to serve. And that includes showing up, no matter the cost. The hangar held a quiet stillness. Trump looked at him, something like admiration settling on his face. Then, placing a hand on Jackson's shoulder, he said, then I think it's time someone walked a few miles for you. Jackson didn't understand at first. Trump continued, his voice steady. I've met CEOs, generals, politicians. But young men like you, quiet heroes, are what keep this country strong. You walk not for applause, but for purpose. That's rare. Jackson stood frozen. Trump turned to an aide. Bring it in. The hangar doors opened once more. A brand new black Ford F-150 rolled in, military plates shining. This, Trump said, is yours. Jackson's eyes widened. Sir, I can't, Trump raised a hand. You didn't ask for anything. That's why you deserve it. The aide stepped forward. Paperwork's done. Insurance, fuel card, maintenance. No strings. Trump smiled. From the American people, through me. A small group of airmen who had quietly gathered began to clap. Jackson looked down, overwhelmed. It wasn't just a truck. It was what it meant, quiet recognition, a nod to the values that guided his every step. I don't know what to say, he finally whispered. Say nothing, Trump replied. Just keep walking your path. Now you've got wheels for the journey. And in that moment, a young airman's steady, silent commitment became a story destined to echo far beyond the miles he walked. Later that afternoon, after the photos and congratulations, Jackson sat behind the wheel of his truck, still unsure if it was all real. For the first time in years, Jackson Reed wasn't walking home. He sat behind the wheel of the brand new truck, still in uniform, his hands gripping the steering wheel like it was something sacred. The low hum of the engine beneath him felt almost unreal, like a dream he hadn't dared to dream. The scent of the new interior, leather, plastic, and something faintly sweet, mixed with memories of every weary step he'd taken along the old cracked pavement. As he drove, the familiar stretch of highway unfolded beside him, the same potholes he'd memorized, the leaning trees that marked his halfway point, even the dented road sign he used to touch like a checkpoint. But today, they flew past his window in a blur. He wasn't walking anymore, he was moving forward with power under his feet. He passed the convenience store. The old clerk spotted him and tipped his cap, grinning so wide it wrinkled his whole face. Jackson Reed honked once and laughed, a free, surprised laugh, then turned into his modest apartment complex. Neighbors stared from their porches and windows in disbelief. His friend Carter bolted down the steps. "Bro, is that yours?" "Apparently, yeah," Jackson said, still half in disbelief. "What happened?" Jackson looked at him and smiled. "The president saw me walking." That sentence, said so plainly, didn't capture the enormity of what had unfolded. But it was enough for now. By morning, the story had spread like wildfire. News anchors across the country picked it up. President gifts young airman a truck after discovering he walks 10 miles daily to work. Base security footage and clips from the presidential press team had captured the moment inside Hangar 4. Social media erupted in admiration. Hashtags like hashtag Jackson the Walker and hashtag Silent Service trended for days. "Who is Airman Jackson Brooks?" one anchor asked, as stories emerged about his upbringing, his grandfather's influence, his quiet discipline, his stoic character. Dozens of interview requests poured in. Jackson turned most of them down. "I didn't do it for the cameras," he told one reporter. "I did it because when you sign up to serve, that's what you do." That quote became the most shared line of the week. President Trump himself posted a tweet. "Met an incredible young airman, Jackson Brooks, who walks 10 miles every day to serve our country. No complaints. No requests. Just commitment. A true American hero. Honored to help. United States." But not everyone watching was a stranger. In a quiet nursing home miles away, a woman sat in front of a small TV, her hands trembling. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered to the nurse beside her, "That's my son." Her name was Janine Brooks, Jackson's estranged mother. The next day at the base, Jackson received a hand-addressed envelope. The writing was shaky, uneven. Inside was a letter on worn stationery. "Dear Jackson. I don't know if you remember me. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. I was sick for a long time, lost in my mind, in addiction. I wasn't there when you needed a mother. But I watched you on TV today. You looked just like your father, strong, silent, proud. I'm so sorry, son. For everything. I've been clean for 4 years now. Living in a recovery home. I never thought you'd remember me. But if you do, I'd love to see you again. Always. Mom, Janine Brooks." Jackson read it twice. Then again. He folded the letter slowly and placed it in his locker, staring at it in silence. He had never spoken about his mother, not to his friends, not to his fellow airmen. His grandfather had told him she'd gone away when he was 10. And now, after all these years, her voice had returned through ink and paper. Because of a walk. Because of a truck. Because of a moment he didn't even plan. He didn't know what to feel. Anger. Confusion. Hope. Sometimes, he realized, the road you walk doesn't just carry you forward, it circles back. Later that week, Colonel Hayes called him into the office. "Coffee?" he asked, gesturing toward a fresh pot. "Yes, sir." They sipped quietly for a moment before Hayes leaned back. "You've handled all this attention well. I'm proud of you." "Thank you, sir." Hayes studied him for a beat. "You thinking about that letter?" Jackson blinked. "How did you?" "I served with your grandfather. We talked often. He worried you'd carry your mother's silence like a wound." Jackson said nothing. Sometimes forgiveness, Hayes said, is harder than a 10-mile walk. But it frees you more than any truck ever could. Jackson nodded, slowly. The words landed hard, and true. Take a few days, Brooks, Hayes added. Go see her. If you're ready. Jackson stood. Yes, sir. That night, he drove, not walked, to a destination more daunting than any he'd faced. The address on the letter led him to Willow Pines Recovery Center. It was quiet. Plain. Beige siding, trimmed hedges, a gently waving flag. He parked and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel like it could steady his nerves. Inside, a kind nurse greeted him. You must be Jackson. She's been talking about this all week. He followed her through clean, quiet halls lined with art and photographs of people trying to live again. They stopped outside a room. She's in there, the nurse said gently. Jackson stepped inside. A frail woman sat by the window, hands folded in her lap. She turned slowly at the sound of the door, her eyes locking on his face. Then she gasped. Jackson. He barely recognized her. But the eyes, they were the same ones that had once read him bedtime stories and kissed his scraped knees. Hi, Mom. Her lips quivered. I didn't know if you'd come. He sat down across from her, unsure of what to say. For a while, they sat in silence. Decades of absence echoed louder than words. Finally, he asked, why now? I was afraid, she admitted. But when I saw you, I couldn't stay silent anymore. She reached for his hand. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry. He didn't pull away. I'm still angry, he said, voice cracking. But I think I want to understand. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. Sometimes healing doesn't start with answers, she said. It starts with presence. They talked. Slowly. Carefully. About the past. About what was lost. And what remained. She told him about her battle with addiction, about how she watched from afar when his grandfather passed and how shame kept her silent. She told him she still had the toy jet he used to carry, his grandfather had mailed it to her one Christmas. That broke him. He laughed and cried all at once. As the sun set, Jackson stood. Can I come back again? He asked. Janine looked at him like he'd just given her breath. Please. He nodded. Next time, I'll bring that toy jet. She chuckled through her tears. I'd like that. Outside, Jackson leaned against his truck and breathed deeply. Something inside had shifted, not resolved, not perfect, but beginning. He didn't walk away from the center that night. But when he drove off, he was somehow lighter than he'd been in years. Jackson sat quietly in his truck, the engine idling, his thoughts somewhere far from the base. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Hello, Airman Brooks. Yes, this is President Trump. I hope I'm not interrupting. Jackson straightened instinctively. No, sir. I saw the update, the voice continued. Heard you visited your mother. Just wanted to say, that took more guts than anything we did at that base. Jackson blinked, unsure how to respond. How did you? Let's just say the story traveled, Trump said with a warm edge. Some stories deserve to. A pause. You know, I've met kings and world leaders, but it's these quiet acts of courage that stay with me. You're not just serving the country, Jackson. You're healing a family. Jackson's throat tightened. Thank you, sir. One more thing, Trump added. Would you mind if we shared that part of your journey? Not publicly, just with a few veterans I know. Some of them could use that kind of hope. Jackson hesitated, then nodded. If it helps someone else, yes. You can. Good man. The line was quiet for a beat. "You've got the strength this country was built on. Never forget that." Click. It wasn't a tweet. It wasn't a headline. Just one man calling another, not as a president, but as someone who understood that real strength is quiet. A month later, Jackson stood in his dress uniform at a graduation ceremony for new airmen. He wasn't graduating, he was there for Carter, who'd just completed tech school. As Carter walked to the stage, his eyes scanned the crowd. One chair in the front row sat empty, his father had passed away, and his mother couldn't make it. But beside that empty chair sat a familiar figure, President Trump. No announcement. No media. Just presence. When Carter shook the commander's hand, he turned and saluted Trump. The president returned the salute with a nod. Later, Jackson asked, "Why did you come?" Trump smiled. "I remembered what you said, about showing up, even when it's hard. Thought maybe I'd try that too." It reminded Jackson of something his grandfather once told him: "You never know who's watching the way you walk." The following week, Trump's foundation quietly launched a new grant, Miles for Service. It offered transportation aid to enlisted men and women struggling to commute. The first recipient? A single mother in Arizona walking 6 miles a day to reach her base. The second? A Navy mechanic who biked through rain or shine. None of them had met Jackson, but they'd all heard the story. And because of it, they were walking easier. Jackson smiled reading the article. He never wanted fame, but knowing his step sparked a solution was worth more than any spotlight. That night, he wrote just one sentence in his journal. "A single step, when noticed, can pave a road for others." He never imagined walking alone in the dark would lead to others driving safely in the light. But that's how impact works, it often begins in silence and echoes where you least expect. Weeks passed. Jackson had settled into a quiet rhythm, rides to base, letters from strangers, and occasional visits to his mother. Then, unexpectedly, President Trump returned to the base. Not for a speech. For a ceremony. Jackson was summoned again. This time, it wasn't a handshake, it was a medal. Standing before his fellow service members, Jackson received the Presidential Medal of Quiet Valor, a special recognition created for those whose off-duty actions inspired national impact. Trump placed the medal gently around his neck. "You showed America that strength isn't always loud," the president said. "It's waking up, lacing your boots, and walking towards something better, even when no one is watching." The applause was thunderous, but Jackson's eyes found only one person, his mother, seated in the second row, tears of pride streaming down her cheeks. After the ceremony, Trump leaned in close. "You didn't just change policy, son, you changed hearts." Jackson swallowed emotion. "Thank you, sir." Trump smiled. "No, Jackson. Thank you for walking." Months later, Jackson and a few fellow airmen unveiled a new bench just outside the base gate. On it, a plaque read, "In honor of every quiet walker who chose duty over ease. Inspired by A1C Jackson Brooks." They placed the bench along Jackson's old walking route, where gravel met pavement, where it all began. One crisp morning, he sat there alone, sipping coffee, watching the sun rise. He didn't need applause or headlines. Just the thought that someone else might sit here one day, tired, unsure, but determined, and feel seen, that was enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small toy jet, the one he'd carried as a boy. Gently, he set it on the bench. A reminder, every journey begins somewhere. Even in worn shoes and lonely miles. On the anniversary of his first walk to base, Jackson rose early. He didn't have to walk anymore. But he laced his boots anyway. With the sun just cresting the horizon, he retraced his 10-mile path, past the gas station, past the leaning signpost, past every memory etched into pavement. People waved now. Some joined him. A few just nodded. He didn't walk in silence anymore. At the final mile, the base gates came into view. Waiting there was a group of young recruits. One stepped forward and saluted. "You're the reason I joined, sir." Jackson smiled. "Then keep walking. Even when it's hard." As he passed through the gate, there was no burden, no ache in his feet. Just peace. Because some walks change a day. Others? They change the world.